In 2013, a woman named Robin Spironis in Cape Coral, Florida, was threatened with eviction from her own home. She hadn't hurt anyone. She hadn't broken anything. She hadn't missed a single mortgage payment. Her crime? She stopped needing an electric bill. She installed solar panels, collected her own rainwater, and disconnected from the city's grid. A judge ruled that living independently of the city's water system was illegal. The government forced her to reconnect, or lose her home. Now, here's the question that should keep you up at night. What if there was a house built from garbage that could heat itself in a blizzard, grow food in the dead of winter, and never need a single dollar for electricity, water, or heating for as long as you live? That house exists. Hundreds of them exist. And in most of the United States, building one is virtually impossible. Welcome back to Historia Prime. Today, we're not just telling you a story, we're going to show you, step by step, the science of the house that needs nothing from the outside world. We're going to expose the system that's fighting to keep you from building one. And at the end, we're going to give you a blueprint, things you can do right now, this week, to start breaking free. Let's get into it. Part 1. Why this matters right now. Before we go back in time to meet the man who started all of this, we need to talk about why this isn't just an interesting history lesson. This is survival. In February 2021, Winter Storm Uri slammed into Texas. The power grid collapsed. Over 4.5 million homes lost electricity, some for nearly a week. Pipes froze. Water systems failed. At least 246 people died. People froze to death inside their own homes in one of the richest countries on Earth. Now think about this. That same week, in the mountains of New Mexico, where winter temperatures regularly drop below zero, there were families sitting in their homes at a steady 65 to 70 degrees. No heater, no furnace, no connection to the grid whatsoever. Their pipes didn't freeze because their water comes from underground cisterns insulated by the Earth itself. Those homes are called Earthships, and the man who invented them started with a pile of garbage and an idea that got his architecture license revoked. Part 2. The Garbage Warrior. The year is 1972. America is in trouble. The OPEC oil embargo is about to turn heating fuel into a luxury. Landfills are overflowing with a material that won't decompose for 1,000 years, car tires. Around 300 million tires are discarded every single year in the United States alone. And the housing market is becoming increasingly unaffordable for ordinary working families. Into this crisis walks a 26-year-old architect named Michael Reynolds. He's just graduated from the University of Cincinnati, and instead of chasing contracts for glass and steel office buildings, he's obsessing over a question nobody else in his field seems to care about. Why do we build houses that can't keep us alive on their own? Think about that. Your house needs electricity from the grid to stay warm. It needs water from the city to function. It needs gas from a utility company. Take any one of those away, as Texas proved, and your house becomes a cold, dark box. Reynolds wanted to build a house that was more like a spaceship, a fully self-contained vessel that provides everything its occupants need to survive, indefinitely, with zero inputs from the outside world. And his first building material? He found it at the dump. Reynolds picked up a worn-out car tire. He dragged it home, and he started packing it with dirt using a sledgehammer. 300 pounds of rammed earth in a single tire. What he created was a brick that wouldn't rot, wouldn't burn, and was virtually indestructible. He stacked these tires like bricks. He filled the gaps with empty aluminium cans and mortar. He coated the whole structure in adobe mud. And he called his creation an Earthship. The name wasn't poetic. It was literal. A spaceship keeps you alive in the vacuum of space. An Earthship keeps you alive independently on Earth. But here's where it gets truly brilliant. Part 3. How a house made of garbage keeps you alive. Let's break down exactly how this works, because the engineering is pure genius. The thermal trick. How the walls heat and cool your home for free. This is the single most important innovation in the Earthship, and it's not technology, it's physics. Here's the problem with a normal house. You turn on your furnace, it heats the air. That hot air rises and starts leaking out through every crack, every window, every gap. Your house is like a bucket with holes in it, constantly losing heat and constantly needing more energy to replace it. Now imagine a completely different approach. Instead of heating the air, you heat the walls themselves. Each Earthship tire weighs about 300 pounds when packed with earth. A typical Earthship has roughly 900 tires in its walls. That's 270,000 pounds of dense, heat-absorbing mass surrounding you. During the day, the winter sun pours through the large, south-facing glass wall and hits those massive tire walls. The earth inside absorbs that heat slowly, like a giant battery charging. At night, when temperatures plummet, those walls begin radiating that stored heat back into the house. Slowly, steadily, for hours. The temperature inside a well-built Earthship stays between 60 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, without a furnace, without an air conditioner, without a single watt of electrical heating. Earthship owners in Taos, New Mexico, have reported maintaining 68 degrees inside while it was -4 degrees outside during a blizzard. And in summer, buried cooling tubes run from the back of the house deep into the earth, where the temperature stays around 55 degrees year-round. Natural convection draws this cool air through the house. No compressor, no refrigerant, no electricity, just the planet itself doing the work. In a country where heating and cooling accounts for approximately half of all residential energy use, that's roughly $225 billion a year, the Earthship eliminates this cost entirely. Let that number sink in. The water cycle, how one drop gets used 4 times. In a normal American home, you use clean, treated drinking water for everything. Washing your hands, drinking water. Flushing the toilet, drinking water. Watering the lawn, drinking water. About 27% of the average household's water goes straight down the toilet, perfectly clean water, wasted. An Earthship treats that like a crime. First, rain and snow are captured by the roof and funneled into underground cisterns. This water is filtered and used for drinking, cooking, and bathing. So far, pretty straightforward, but here's where the system gets clever. After you shower or wash your hands, that slightly dirty, grey water doesn't go down the drain. It flows into indoor botanical planters, essentially a garden built into your hallway. The plants clean the water naturally through their root systems. Then that plant-filtered water is used to flush the toilet. Only then, after being used 3 times, does the water become black water. And even that isn't wasted. It's directed to an outdoor septic cell that irrigates non-edible landscaping. 1 drop, 4 uses, 0 waste. The indoor jungle, growing bananas in a blizzard. The south-facing wall of every Earthship is a massive slanted wall of glass. Behind it sits a greenhouse corridor that runs the full length of the house. This isn't a cute little herb garden. Earthship owners in the mountains of Colorado and the deserts of New Mexico grow bananas, grapes, figs, tomatoes, peppers, kale, and citrus year-round, even when there's 3 feet of snow outside. The greenhouse serves double duty. It acts as a thermal buffer, a warm pocket of air between the cold outside and your living space, and it produces food. Some Earthship families report growing 40 to 60% of their own produce. And the electrical needs? Because the house doesn't need power-hungry heaters or AC units, a modest solar panel array and battery bank provide more than enough juice for lights, computers, refrigeration, and entertainment. The average Earthship runs on roughly 1/10 of the electricity a conventional American home consumes. So let's summarize what we have here. A house that heats and cools itself, catches and recycles its own water, grows its own food, generates its own electricity, built largely from materials that would otherwise sit in a landfill for 1,000 years, with zero monthly utility bills, forever. Sounds perfect, right? Not so fast. Part 4. The tire question. Are Earthship owners poisoning themselves? We need to have an honest conversation here, because if we skip this part, we lose credibility. And this channel is about truth, not fantasy. Tires are chemical cocktails. They contain volatile organic compounds, VOCs, including benzene, toluene, and heavy metals like arsenic, lead, and cadmium. Studies have documented that when tires decompose, they release these compounds. A major health controversy erupted when research suggested that children playing on artificial turf made from ground-up crumb rubber may face elevated cancer risks. So the question is legitimate. Are Earthship residents slowly breathing in toxic fumes from their own walls? Here's where the science requires precision, not panic. Tires off-gas, meaning they release harmful chemicals under 3 specific conditions: exposure to high heat, exposure to ultraviolet radiation from the sun, and exposure to oxygen. Ground-up rubber scattered across a sun-baked soccer field hits all 3. It's exposed, degrading, and hot. In an Earthship, the conditions are the exact opposite. The tires are packed solid with 300 pounds of compressed earth. They're stacked and then completely encased, sealed, behind thick layers of concrete, adobe, or plaster. No sunlight reaches them. No oxygen circulates around them. They are entombed. Research conducted at Humboldt State University tested air quality inside Earthships and found that VOC levels were comparable to, and in some cases lower than, conventional homes built with standard materials like pressed wood, carpet adhesives, and synthetic insulation. In other words, the paint on your apartment walls may be off-gassing more toxins than an entombed tire. Are there zero risks? No honest scientist would say that. Long-term studies spanning 50 to 100 years simply don't exist yet. But the existing evidence strongly suggests that sealed, entombed tires are chemically inert and pose negligible risk. Yet for most building inspectors and regulatory boards, the word tire triggers an automatic rejection. And that leads us to the most infuriating part of this entire story. Part 5. The system strikes back. Why self-sufficiency is illegal. In the late 1980s, Michael Reynolds was building Earthships across Taos, New Mexico. People were living in them. Nobody got hurt. No houses collapsed. Families were happy, self-sufficient, and debt-free. Then the New Mexico Construction Industries Division showed up. They didn't argue that the houses were unsafe. They argued that the materials weren't on the approved list. In 1990, they revoked Michael Reynolds' architectural license. Let that sit for a moment. A licensed architect building homes that worked, using materials that didn't fail, for clients who were satisfied, stripped of his ability to practice because his bricks weren't made of the right stuff. To understand why this keeps happening, you have to follow the money. Who writes the rules? In the United States, residential construction is governed primarily by the International Residential Code, or IRC. This code is updated every 3 years by the International Code Council. Now, you might assume that a code council is staffed by independent safety experts and scientists. Some are, but the council is also heavily influenced by corporate members from the building products manufacturing industry. The Portland Cement Association, the American Chemistry Council, the National Association of Home Builders. These are industries whose profits depend on you buying their lumber, their drywall, their insulation, their concrete. And the rules they help write, they require you to use those exact materials. A rammed earth tire, no matter how strong or durable, simply isn't on the list. Now let's be fair here, and this is important. Building codes exist because people have died in poorly constructed homes. Shoddy wiring causes house fires. Bad foundations cause collapses. The codes are not inherently evil. The question is whether specific codes are serving public safety or serving industry profits. The $450 billion question. The US residential energy market generates approximately $450 billion in annual revenue. Roughly half of that, $225 billion, comes from heating and cooling alone. The entire ecosystem, from fossil fuel producers to utility grids to HVAC manufacturers and repairmen, depends on one fundamental reality: you paying a monthly bill, every month, for life. An Earthship shatters that model completely. You cannot meter a dirt wall. You cannot send a monthly bill to the sun. This isn't speculation. In recent years, gas utilities and home-building lobbyists have spent millions of dollars actively fighting against green building codes. In Washington state, the gas industry has repeatedly filed lawsuits to block climate-friendly building standards. The goal isn't safety, the goal is dependency. The Robin Spironis case. Remember Robin Spironis from our opening? Let's go deeper into her story because it reveals the machinery at work. Robin lived in a normal house in Cape Coral, Florida. She installed solar panels. She collected rainwater. She wasn't bothering a single neighbor. She did an interview on local TV, proud of her self-sufficient lifestyle. Within days, the city slapped an eviction notice on her door. A judge ruled that living independently of the municipal water system violated the International Property Maintenance Code. The city capped her pipes and forced her to reconnect to the sewer and water grid, a system she didn't need and didn't want. The message was unmistakable: you are not allowed to not need us. As one Earthship advocate summarized it, and I think this is worth repeating, the codes were not written to keep people safe. They were written to keep people paying. Is that too cynical? Maybe. But when an architect who builds functional houses out of free materials gets his license revoked, and a homeowner who disconnects from the grid gets evicted, at some point, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. Part 6. Reynolds fights back and wins. Michael Reynolds didn't quit. It took him 17 years of legal battles, but he eventually got his architectural license restored. More importantly, he helped push through a groundbreaking piece of legislation in New Mexico, the Sustainable Development Testing Site Act. This law created designated zones, small pockets of land, where innovators are exempt from traditional building codes and can test experimental, sustainable architecture. Today, the Greater World Earthship community near Taos, New Mexico, is a thriving neighborhood of off-grid homes. Families live there year-round. They grow their own food. They drink their own rainwater. They pay zero utility bills, and they've been doing it for decades. Earthships have also been built in over 40 countries around the world, from the humid tropics of Central America to the harsh winters of Canada and Northern Europe. Each design is adapted to the local climate, proving that the core principles work everywhere. But what about you? What if you don't want to move to the New Mexico desert and spend 17 years fighting the government? Part 7. Your Blueprint. What you can do this week. Here's the part that matters most, because the point of Historia Prime isn't just to tell you fascinating stories, it's to give you knowledge you can actually use. 1. Audit your dependency. Right now, this week, walk through your house. Count every system that keeps you alive that you have zero control over. Electricity, controlled by the grid. Water, controlled by the city. Heat, controlled by a gas company. Food, controlled by supply chains you can't see. This isn't about paranoia, it's about awareness. You can't fix what you can't see. Most Americans have 5 to 7 critical dependencies on systems they don't control and can't repair. Simply knowing that number changes how you think. 2. Start with thermal mass. You don't need tires to use the sun's heat. If you're remodeling or building, consider placing heavy materials, stone tile, concrete counters, thick brick or masonry, in areas where the winter sun enters through south-facing windows. These dense materials absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night. Even something as simple as placing large water containers in a sunny window can act as thermal batteries. A retired couple in Vermont cut their winter heating bill by 35% just by installing stone floors and a masonry heater in their south-facing living room. 3. Secure your water. Rainwater harvesting laws are changing rapidly. States like Texas, Colorado, and Oregon have loosened restrictions in recent years. Even where full off-grid water is restricted, most areas allow rain barrels for garden irrigation. Start simple. A 55-gallon rain barrel costs about $60 to $100 and can collect roughly 600 gallons from a single inch of rain falling on an average roof. That's emergency water. That's garden water. That's one step closer to resilience. 4. Explore plug-in solar. If you rent or if you can't afford a $20,000 to $30,000 rooftop solar array, there's a quiet revolution happening. Plug-in solar panels, sometimes called balcony solar, are small portable panels that connect directly to a standard wall outlet and feed energy back into your home. In Europe, particularly Germany and the Netherlands, millions of these units are already in use. In the US, regulatory red tape has slowed adoption, but states like Utah are passing laws to make them accessible. A single 800-watt balcony panel can offset 15 to 20% of a typical apartment's electricity use. For about $400 to $700, that's real money saved every month. 5. Redefine waste. This is the deepest lesson Michael Reynolds teaches, and it has nothing to do with tires. It's a shift in perception. What your society calls trash is often an underutilized resource. Coffee grounds become garden fertilizer. Old windows become cold frames for extending your growing season. Pallet wood becomes raised garden beds. Cardboard becomes sheet mulch that kills weeds and builds soil. True survival has never been about buying the most expensive gear. It's about looking at what is abundant around you and figuring out how to use it to sustain life. Reynolds built houses from garbage. You can start by looking at your waste differently. Conclusion. The story of the Earthship is one of the great contradictions of modern life. We are constantly told to go green, save the planet, reduce your carbon footprint, recycle, be sustainable. And yet, when a rogue architect actually does it, when he builds a house that produces zero emissions, generates its own power, grows its own food, recycles every drop of water, and frees ordinary people from a lifetime of utility debt, the system tries to crush him. It makes you wonder, does modern society actually want to solve the energy crisis, or does it just want to sell us a slightly more efficient version of the same dependency? The physics work. The blueprint exists. The proof is standing in the desert of New Mexico right now, keeping families warm while the wind howls outside. Somewhere in Taos, right now, a man is sitting in a house made of garbage, eating a banana from a tree growing in his living room, warm as summer, while a blizzard pounds the walls. The technology to live free exists. The only question is whether we'll be allowed to use it. You cannot meter a dirt wall. You cannot send a monthly bill to the sun. If this story changed the way you think, hit that like button and subscribe to Historia Prime. Ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Drop a comment below and tell me, if you had the land, would you build an Earthship? Until next time, keep questioning the system, stay prepared, and remember, True freedom begins when you build it yourself.